Library and Archives Canada is the custodian of the 5th largest collection in the world. In addition to serving as a repository of knowledge, LAC actively supports creators, researchers, and storytellers in sharing diverse perspectives and narratives. It encourages the exploration of the truths and stories that shape our shared history.
I'm going to create as much of a suspension of disbelief for you as I possibly can, because that's my job as a director, as a playwright, as a, as an actor. All of those things I'm responsible for, and that's when we think about that authenticity or that honesty or that truth, it is really embedded in knowing, understanding, researching, and applying that knowledge into this artistic world. When we go into the communities, we're not teaching them their culture on stage, they're witnessing their culture on stage. But that it's easily transferable to non-Indigenous audiences because they get to go into the story, into the relationships, and just into the art itself. When we think about our true Indigenous history that's been documented in this country, it's still through the snippets and relationships that don't have a linear line to them. As an Indigenous person, I'm putting together histories of people that have accomplished great things in this country through, a chapter, a poem, a song, but we have never driven our own narrative and documented in that same way that are in the archives or in libraries. And that's the power of story and how things can be passed down accurately through oral knowledge. I don't feel like every story is mine, but when a story comes to me, I feel I have a responsibility to keep it alive. I do come from a fractured history like most of us, if not all of us Indigenous peoples have in this country. That displacement of family has really disrupted how we are, how we grow up. So I was fortunate when I was young to live on the trap line with my grandmother, and her partner at the time was Archie Larocque. He guided the RCMP when they used to travel by dog team across the Arctic. Those trappers and prospectors were called the Dog Patrol. When Archie passed away, I was gifted his stories. He recorded his stories on cassette tape, and there we talk about knowledge.
Go straight west. Keep going. Don't go north, don't go south, go straight west.
And so I spent a summer listening to them and digitizing them. I know that he was recording those stories because I think he wanted his own story to be heard. 19 years old, I went down to Montana for this Indigenous Environmental Network gathering. John Trudell was part of the American Indian movement. He said, as Indigenous people, we're always told that to be proud. When you look at Anishinaabe or Cree, it's never pride. It's love, respect, listening, patience. And when he said that, it just tore away that sense of what we were told to be and who we actually are. That's how I just live now. And I call it my getting off the mountain moment. When I started embedding myself in story, I stopped reading books about us and started talking to elders and knowledge keepers who lived those experiences and started learning from them directly. And And what you recognize as you're doing research for, say, Powaggan or Tukalitu, or any work that I create is steeped in research. It's all still very much, every practice, every kind of process, every grounding of inspiration still comes from a place of land. Everything is in relationship to community and who we are and how we bring our entire selves. And that includes our connection to land and our lived experience.
Islands are special places. They're places unto themselves. And when you grow up on one, there is this feeling like I live on an island, and there's something special about it. I'm sure that is part of my work and informs everything that I have made. And I always felt supported by my community. I always felt like I had a voice that was worth hearing, because the art in my community is the art of community. When I was doing research for Harkavagrant, I'd often go to libraries. I lived in lots of different places. I lived in Toronto, Victoria, Halifax. I lived in New York, many different moves. And what I say I'm missing, I lived in St. John's for a while. So I couldn't even tell you the different library branches that I would be around, but that would be one of my favorite places to go and work. You would just go around the stacks or something like that, and it would be something new every time. Nobody was untouchable. That people were going to be human beings no matter what they did. That they were just going to act like human beings do, which is make mistakes, be imperfect. And I began to look at history that way as well. I would draw these historical figures, and they would have imperfect characteristics because they were all human beings. And I'm interested in all this stuff and how we tell stories and how we look at the past and how we've engaged with the past and how we've looked at historical figures. And I do find that if you're laughing, you're already learning, and you're interested. At the time when I was coming up, it was a given that you were going to leave and you were going to feel sad about it. And of course, as soon as you leave, you're pining for home. I wanted to be an artist from a very young age. That was always an end goal for me. But it's difficult being from a small place and a fairly poor place as well that doesn't have the resources to produce artists, because the arts is packed with far more people who come from wealth than not. It's far better in the eyes of the working class person to take a safe road. If we don't have more working class voices, then we are missing a lot of people who make up what we consider the culture of this country to be. That is what art in this country is. It is what we eventually accept as our culture. And so when we don't talk about class, we are missing something very important in the metric of diversity in Canada. And if they all come from money, then we are leaving out an entire swath. And in fact, a majority of people in our country who just have less. And that's a terrible price to pay. I'm from a community that has always valued art. You're in a space right now that promotes art for no money, for joy, for community, for telling its own stories. The value that people have on art for its own sake here is priceless. And I benefited from that immensely. I moved back home, and one of the first things that I did was join this society to keep the doors open, because it is for people to use. And that is the spirit of a library and archive.
Et à bientôt.
Bravo!
Ben, quand j'étais petit, en fait, quand j'étais très, très jeune, mes parents fréquentaient la bibliothèque municipale et donc avaient accès à plein de choses. Pour moi, ça me passionnait et j'ai comme ça découvert un milliard de choses. Ben, j'ai commencé à faire à m'intéresser à ce qui était culturel très tôt. J'ai été chroniqueur de cinéma, critique de cinéma pendant longtemps à la presse, entre autres. Et puis à un moment donné, je me suis rendu compte qu'il y avait plein d'autres choses qui m'intéressaient. Et comme on m'offrait un talk show à la télé, et qu'à cette époque-là, j'étais persuadé que la télé était infiniment mieux, infiniment plus intéressante que la radio ou que la presse. Puis je me suis rendu compte que c'était pas vrai pantoute, parce que la presse écrite, pour moi, ça demeure quelque chose de formidable. Et la radio, c'est un monde. On peut faire 1 milliard de choses. Il n'y a aucune sorte d'esclavage à la radio. L'image, on s'en fout. J'arrivais à la radio à 5 heures le matin. J'étais pas toujours bien coiffé. Mettons, si j'avais eu des cheveux, je n'aurais pas toujours été bien coiffé. Mais on s'en fout parce qu'il n'y a pas de... le physique n'existe pas. Il n'y a que l'âme qui compte. Donc, la voix et le propos et ce que l'on dit avec cette voix-là. Et à la radio, je trouve que c'est extraordinaire. Et les plus belles années de ma vie professionnelle, ça a été les années que j'ai passées, les 15 années que j'ai passées à faire l'émission du matin. Ça s'appelait « C'est bien meilleur le matin » à la radio de Radio-Canada. J'avais pas de vie sociale vraiment, mais j'avais une vie formidable, formidablement riche à cause de tous les gens que je rencontrais, avec lesquels je parlais. La radio, puisqu'il n'y a pas d'image qu'on nous donne, nous force à nous en faire des images. Quand ce serait que, si c'est une histoire qu'on nous raconte, bien, on la suit dans notre tête, mais même quand c'est des choses beaucoup plus pratiques, des choses plus down to earth, la radio nous permet vraiment d'aller plus loin et de se développer intellectuellement, en termes d'imaginaire et tout. Il n'y a aucun autre médium, sauf peut-être l'imprimé, parce que l'imprimé existe depuis tellement longtemps. Il y a tellement de choses qui ont été imprimées, qui sont des livres, et qu'on n'a aucun accès à ça sinon de lire les livres. Mais pour maintenant, je suis certain que c'est la radio qui est la plus riche de très loin. Du lundi au vendredi, aux aurores. Ce que je dirais à des gens qui sont jeunes, ce que je suis plus depuis longtemps, et qui ont envie de faire ce métier-là, je leur dirais la chose que j'ai toujours faite, moi, oser. Osez faire. Si vous avez un rêve, osez le réaliser. Dans les magazines que j'ai faits, c'est comme ça, c'est que le ton dans les magazines, dans l'écrit, donc, était un peu comme le ton que j'ai eu à la radio le matin. C'était très convivial, et ça parlait de choses sérieuses, mais sur un ton convivial. Le premier magazine que j'ai fait, personne n'y croyait. Ça s'appelait « Nous, le magazine des Québécois libérés », dans le sens de pas libérés politiquement, mais libérés de l'Église, libérés de tout ce qui nous encombrait avant. Et ça a été vraiment quelque chose de formidable. Ça a marché. Ce qui se fait au Québec, toute petite province, par rapport à ce qui se fait au Canada, grand pays, avec des budgets infiniment plus importants qu'on en a au Québec. La créativité que les gens ici ont, qui est absolument extraordinaire. C'est à cause du français, c'est sûr, mais c'est aussi à cause du fait qu'au Québec, on a été comprimé pendant très, très longtemps. Puis à un moment donné, il fallait que ça explose, il fallait que ça casse, il fallait que ça sorte, et c'est sorti avec, en littérature, des affaires formidables, en cinéma et en télévision.
Bonsoir et bienvenue à cette édition spéciale de Viens voir les comédiens.
De par notre situation géographique, politico-géographique, géopolitique, on n'a pas le choix que d'être bon. On n'a pas le choix que de se débattre, et de foncer.
Of course, all the public libraries, they've been central to my life. They have fed my desire. They fuel me, they fuel the writing. So without books, there wouldn't be any writing. When I started to write, of course, I wasn't even dreaming about being published. So I decided to take some evening classes at the University of Toronto. Not with any career move in mind, just to spend the evenings in a pleasant way, so I could indulge my love of literature. So I studied English and philosophy. It was during those years that I started toying with the idea of trying to write something myself. When the short story contest came to my attention, so I wrote my first story, sent it in. It was awarded first prize. So I thought maybe there's a message here for me. This is something I should persevere in. I began to think maybe I should do something with these, maybe send them out, try to get them published, but where to send them? So I went to my local library in Brampton and checked out the shelves and found all the literary periodicals and magazines that were publishing new writing by new Canadian authors. Found places I could send the stories to. They got published. That's how it started, really. There's no one set way for all books. Each book is different, and most of my writing begins with an image, either an image of a character or some kind of scene. And if that image or scene stays with me, then that's a hint that this is something I might want to write about. So that's sort of conscious decision. I create my own little archive for each book. For example, I collect newspaper clippings and magazine articles, which instinct might say I might need someday. I was writing about a period when I was still in India. I had discussed it with friends and family over there. So it's all very much first-hand for me. I think the particular is the pathway to the universal. So what I mean is characters, scenes, settings. You have to be true to them, write about them with complete honesty, with due regard for their individuality. When I write a character, to that character make him unique or her, a three-dimensional person, fully rounded, And if I don't do that, that character is going to be flat on the page. The character first has to live on the page, then the character goes through all the things that we share as humans. When I write in Canada about India, there is a sense of freedom, especially in today's atmosphere, where so many writers are worried about that subconscious censor. And in Canada, I think I can write without even thinking about those concerns. So that's one direct influence of Canada, I think, that helps my writing. I hope the books will tell young readers that there is room in Canada for all kinds of stories from all over the world. And it doesn't matter what you write about, as long as it's good, if you can tell a good story. That is the true work of a novelist or a storyteller, to pose the important questions, not to offer answers, because it's the questions that make us think and come to our own conclusions. Coming to our own conclusion is very important if you're not to get into groupthink and mob mentality.
It was in childhood that I knew actually that I wanted to be not a writer, but a painter, a visual artist. There was a French painter traveling the Caribbean, and my parents asked him to come and paint the four of us. Then at the end of it, so he hands me this bouquet of paintbrushes, and then he said, "I've been watching you, and you have talent. I'm giving you these." That became my practice, my desire, my dream. After I finished school, university and so on, and went to live in Vancouver, I was having a lot of trouble, and it was mostly around the idea of coming out. And I got in touch with Jack Shadbolt. He made several home visits, studio visits, and he started basically mentoring me. And at one point he said, "Shani, I think something's going on. Your painting is getting very, very dark." I thought, this man is seeing inside of me what I've been trying to hide. Then there was another painter called Persimmon Blackbridge. She saw the writing and she said, "Can I take the writing away?" And I said, "Sure, that way you probably understand more about my artwork." Now, unknown to me, Persimmon was taking the manuscript to a publisher. She was showing them my writing. And they basically said to me, what we would suggest is a book of short stories and or a novel. That's basically how my first two books came about. Out on Main Street and then Serious Blooms at Night. I eventually end up writing stories that would explain something to me. I am not writing for everybody. I am writing for myself because there are those questions that I'm constantly trying to work out for myself. In terms of the photography, I don't know, something just catches my attention, and one picture will lead to another picture, and it suddenly becomes a series because I suddenly realize there's, people are telling stories in the way they curate. In Canada, I was able to come out and live as a queer person, as a lesbian, in a way that I was not able to in Trinidad. So I would like to be thought of not as a lesbian who writes, but a writer who happens to be lesbian. In Canada, we're always asking, where are you from? You know, where are your parents from? My ancestry is the African slave trade. My ancestry is Christopher Columbus, indigenous people in the Caribbean, Henry the Navigator, Cortez, Queen Isabella, Ferdinand, her husband, Queen Victoria, because they all had a hand in what happened to me in the end. Eric Swanwick, who was the archivist at Simon Fraser, he wanted to begin collecting the work of the younger writers of the time. He told me, he said, you know what archivists like? You write a grocery list and they want that. And very recently, Linda Mora, who's a professor at Bishop's University, put on an exhibition of stuff from the archives that were related to me and my work. What they will get, I think, is a picture of a person who always had art and writing and culture in some way, you know, at the forefront of their brain. That's what they were going to do.
Hello, bonjour. Je m'appelle David O et je suis vice-président Relations avec les gouvernements et les collectivités pour Air Canada. C'est un plaisir pour Air Canada de célébrer cet événement avec vous. Nous sommes fiers d'être un partenaire fondateur des prix Bibliothèque et Archives Canada. As the country's national carrier, we value our Canadian heritage and our role in promoting Canada's extraordinary culture and partnering with organizations that brings communities together to celebrate our values. On behalf of Air Canada and our 32,000 employees, thank you for your exceptional work. Nos sincères félicitations à tous les récipiendaires. Merci, thank you.
The Library and Archives Canada Foundation supports LAC's essential work in preserving and promoting knowledge and understanding of our history and the cultures that compose the tapestry of our country. On behalf of the LAC Foundation's board, I join in highlighting and applauding our impressive awardees.